very much, Robert Dilts, for having us here. We are like a joint venture. It's NLP Pakistan.
Yes.
And organization from Holland or the Netherlands, the Dutch Association of NLP. And we have some questions.
Yes.
And in the idea of what you present as collaborative and generative, we thought we could do it together.
That sounds
That's
great to me. I'm very happy.
And ladies and gentlemen, this is Dr. Imran from Pakistan NLP Association, having an opportunity here to be with Robert Dilts at NLP University. And guess where? At University of Santa Cruz, the place of NLP birth. So it's a birthplace of NLP.
That's
Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
That's right.
So I forgot to introduce myself. After Robert Dilts, Dr. Imran Muhammad, this is Angelique de Graaf. Okay, so I was allowed to ask the first question.
Oh, good.
Yes. And you know, Robert, in the organization of NLP in Holland, there is this magazine, and we need to publish something, or we want to publish something. And I desperately want your ideas about lifestyle things. In the way that to enhance your health, how it is to walk or run, meditate, maybe even look for shamanism or all that kind of things.
Yeah.
Is there anything that connects those sort of things with NLP in your idea?
I think, well, they're all connected with NLP, in my idea. I mean, NLP, first of all, in my idea, NLP is not some specific group of techniques. NLP is the whole world. We used to say it's the study of the structure of subjective experience. And from there, we've added this whole notion. You have a cognitive world, you have a somatic world, a field world. And so for health and for well-being, we need to take care of all of those aspects of ourselves. Our mind, our body, our spirit. And I think each of these things that you were mentioning, whether it's running or something physical, whether it's shamanism, whether it's meditation, each of those are practices that help us to bring together and align these three different, aspects of ourselves: our cognitive, our somatic, and our relational aspect. So certainly, I think for any kind of sustained and sustainable health or well-being, you need practices. Not just technique. Technique you do and it's over. Practice is something that you do again and again in order to, on the one hand, really bring something deeply into the muscle, into your identity. But it is also an ongoing, practice is an ongoing acknowledgement that I'm doing this for myself. And I would say that, as I think Carl Jung used to point out, you need to have some kind of ongoing practice that you're doing not for your work and not for your family, but for yourself, for your own well-being, this idea of your own self-care. And so, for me, my practice, certainly one of my biggest practices, is that I'm running every day for at least an hour to an hour and a half every day, and it's in that period that I am often doing other things. I'm meditating, I'm future pacing, I'm listening, and I think these are things that everybody in NLP should find for themselves.
Yeah. Adding to those words of you, there's this crazy question, because NLP, with all the tools of NLP, you might even be able to imagine a lot of things.
Yeah.
There is this thing of motor imagining.
Sure.
Would it be replaceable by that? Could I just imagine running and then have the same effect?
Certainly, obviously there's been a lot of research even about this whole notion of motor imagination. A lot of, in fact, NLP programs, strategies and techniques are based upon that. You take the very fundamental NLP strategy of the new behavior generator. You picture yourself, you step into it, and that's part of how you program it. However, for me, there is something that's different. Sure, I can imagine eating something good for me and then go ahead and eat, garbage, and it's, that's probably not going to be so well. I mean, so for me, I use both, of course. I'm going to always want to be using my new behavior generator. But the practice that I have, and the reason that I run, is that I also need to really engage my somatic mind. Using my cognitive mind to enhance something that's in my body is great, but that's not the same as using your body. So for me, that it goes the other way. What I do with my body brings something to my mind. It doesn't just go in that direction. So for me, this is another part of self-care. It's showing care to my body, to my habits of eating. For example, I'm vegetarian. I'm really wanting to be careful. I eat organic things because, first of all, not only is that important for me and my body, but I think it's important for the world. And we would say that this is this idea that we use of whole on. I am, and whole on and hologram. I am whole, but I'm made up of other wholes, parts of myself, and I'm part of a bigger whole. And so we often like to say that, the way that I am treating myself also it makes a difference. It's the way I'm also going to be treating the world around me. And in fact, to be the best of myself, I am not just separate from the rest of the ecology. If I want to make a better world, I need to be, this is this idea that Gandhi said, I need to be the change that I want to see in the world. So for me, obviously I use very much all of the visualization techniques, but it's not a substitute for my somatic wisdom. It's adding.
And it's funny not funny, it's interesting. Yeah. You used the word hold on here because I'm sure that Dr. Abraham had a question.
What I've that the participants noticed in your programs now, that it starts with prayer, and then there is a poem. I have personally witnessed that you are reciting some of the poetry of Rumi.
Yes, of course.
Like we are talking spirituality here. Where NLP? What is the origin of spirituality in NLP?
Well, first of all, I think it's rather strange that NLP has not embraced spirituality as fully as it can. Because if you say, well, look, NLP is the study of the structure of subjective experience. People have had spiritual experiences since the beginning of humanity. So it should very much be part of what NLP studies. It's one of our strongest, subjective experiences. And for me, spirituality is essentially the feeling that I am part of something that is bigger than me. And as you extend that out, that could be a family, it could be a culture, it could be a community, it could be a planet. And then as you keep extending out, you're going to eventually get to what we would call a very large a sense of a field. You can call it universe, you can call it God. And I think what prayer is, I wrote a book 20 years ago called Tools of the Spirit. And the whole purpose of that book was taking neuro-linguistic programming and saying, well, actually, people have used neuro-linguistic programs to enhance and create their spiritual experiences. Again, since the beginning of recorded time, through prayer, through song, through dance, through movement, through ritual. And why do we do those things? Every human culture does them. So you can't say, well, that's not interesting, that doesn't relate to NLP. People heal through these rituals. We create through these rituals. I think it's one of the places where genius comes from. It doesn't come from an analytical, rational, cognitive approach. It comes from, usually what geniuses say is that my most important breakthrough didn't come from me, it came to me, or it comes through me. So forever, the most creative people, the people that have brought some of the biggest change, positive change to the world, have talked about this kind of a spiritual framework where the spirit is not the physical, it's the relation, it's this notion of what we're calling whole on. And I think this is big part of what what we say this third generation, maybe fourth generation of NLP is about is actively including that. NLP is always about modeling. It says, well, the map isn't the territory, but if we can create useful ways that I am able to, first of all, be whole in myself. That's what we were talking about with these practices. My whole being. And then as a whole being, I am part of something bigger than myself from which I receive and to which I serve. The great Nobel Prize winner Rabindranath Tagore from India said that, had this beautiful saying where he said, I slept and I dreamt that life was joy. I awoke and I saw that life was service. And I served and I discovered service is joy.
It's the joy.
Yeah,
Exactly.
So, and I think that says something about this idea of hold on.
Yeah, as you had mentioned about this hold on, as you know, the people had this misconception about NLP as a pseudoscience.
Yes.
And then you have developed such wonderful techniques, which I will ask you to elaborate as well, like success factor modeling,
Yes.
and generative coaching, collaboration. And now here you start talking about hold on and holograms and holographic society.
Yeah.
So will not be again will be misconceived as a pseudoscience again?
What's the question is, well, what is this? What do you mean by pseudoscience? You can call anything a name. For me, the big thing about if you say science is only about objectively measured things, then I would say, of course, NLP is not a science in that regard. It's not the science of objective measurement. It's the science of subjective experience. That's what it is. And subjective experience you can't measure with a ruler or with a microscope. You can measure it through your direct experiences. And the other thing that NLP, that I think why people go, oh, it's pseudoscience, is, first of all, NLP is not looking for some statistical result. What we learned from people like Milton Erickson, who had the most successful record of any psychologist, psychiatrist to date, is he never did the same thing twice with anybody. There are no statistics on what Erickson did. He didn't work with statistics. Statistics doesn't matter when you're working with an individual. If I'm working with you, or I'm working with you, as Erickson said, what I am is I'm very curious to discover what is possible with us right now. No statistic, no history, no other person can give me that answer. So if you call that pseudoscience, that your interest is in this curiosity to discover what is possible rather than repeat what already has existed, then I say it's a pseudoscience. But I say that's much better than science.
Yeah.
And it's a much different purpose.
Yeah.
Now I think, that being said, I'm not against if NLP produces a technique and says this technique, now a technique can be measured. I don't use technique as just a technique and do the same thing with everybody, so that doesn't really make much difference to me. But NLP techniques are being researched. Right? There is the trauma technique, which has been currently being researched. There's been 4 pilot studies. It's shown over 90% of the people that have done each of these 4 things has had a complete cure, according to scientific measurement, from post-traumatic stress. So I think you should be able to, if you take something and you do put it into something that is measured scientifically, great. But you can call coaching pseudoscience. You can call business pseudoscience. Most business, but its purpose is not to be science. When I do success factor modeling, by the time somebody took that and ran it through a whole bunch of statistics, it would be too late. The world would have changed and it wouldn't make any difference anymore. Right? So we live in a changing world. Many of the things that NLP is looking at is not something that you can assume. You live in this fixed, stable world that is always the same, and you can always get the same result. We live in a dynamic, constantly changing, constantly co-created world. And so it's very difficult to say, well, let me just do the same thing with a whole bunch of different people and see what the result is. From the NLP perspective, that's kind of crazy. Yeah. It doesn't make any sense to do that. Which is why, again, I can understand why people from certain academic perspectives would be threatened by that, or to say that doesn't fit with our way of doing things. Like, again, I've also developed things like developed an allergy technique. We researched that allergy technique. It did show statistical significance with people that had very serious allergies. So it's not that I don't know what they mean when they say it's a pseudoscience, except that, how do I say, it's not measurable in the same way that you can measure something from physics.
It's interesting again. I find myself, while you are telling us that, I find myself wanting to make your movements because I can so, feel what you're saying. And that brings me to another question. Being here in the birthplace of NLP, where you were in that very early stage, obviously, if you make a contrast of you, Robert Dilts, as the young boy, and now, and all the way through modeling geniuses, and what did NLP, as far as you know, because you can't know if it comes through NLP only, what is the change in you?
Oh, well, hopefully I've become more wise, number one. Let's hope that's one of the main things, And actually, wisdom is something that is important to me. In my latest book, I'm writing about the so-called wisdom of crowds, but then I'm introducing that with the notion of, well, what is wisdom? And so first of all, wisdom, it's very clear, wisdom doesn't just come from experience. There are people that have a lot of experiences that are not wise. Wisdom comes from reflection of lessons learned by experience. And I think what NLP gives you, as more than maybe anything else, is that capability to reflect on your experience and the lessons learned from experience. That whole notion of constantly self-modeling, asking that question, what's the difference that makes the difference? I think also, if I look at what has happened in my life, I've certainly have become much more confident, much more courageous about certain things because I've seen the value of them, I've experienced the value of them. In the earlier days, of course, it was much more of an exploration, opening to being curious, and then over the time really seeing, learning from what are the most important things. It's like I said, that in my time, I would say I've learned again and again that the technique itself is not the most important thing. It's not unimportant. It is significant, and techniques are very valid. But, if the way that I use the technique, the quality of relationship that I have, what state I'm in while I use it, makes a huge difference, because that is all the context around it. So I think I've become more and more aware in some ways, is what we've been talking about, is this, this whole on. As I studied, geniuses and studied healing, not just, Western healing, but, shamanic healing, other forms of healing, spiritual healing, what you realize is, there is this, that I've learned to take more and more of this whole on into account. Although, my main teachers in the early days, besides Bandler and Grinder, were Erickson and Gregory Bateson. And both of them were already, they were in their, it's very interesting, when I was a young man and they were in their 70s, 80s. And so they were my role models. And I always felt most of my life was going to be preparation, that by the time I reached the age I am now, about 60, that's when I'm going to really start what I'm here for, because that's going to take that much time.
Absolutely.
To develop the skill and the capacity to be able to hold all of these different levels simultaneously.
So the bridge, I see you want to ask a question first. You go.
Okay, so what do the world respect Robert Dilts most, that Robert does what he says? So when he says collaboration, people have witnessed all different organizations, independent, and Robert Dilts NLP University is sharing their platform.
Yes.
And one of the proof that you can find the collaboration here, the Association of East and Association of West sitting together and interviewing you. So that's very much obvious that world knows what Robert Dilts has been doing and how he shares. This word of generative. How you will explain generative to a layman people?
Yeah, that's a great question, and truly generative is an important part. And I would say maybe And it's always been there, since I was a young person. Going back to your question too, but I think the emphasis on generative has become more and more important for me. Because, generative, as I was saying before, it's not about trying to repeat something that worked or repeat the past. It's about creating something new. So if I was going to explain it to, the simplest way to explain generative to the layman is it's essentially creative. You're creating. And so we need in our world today more creativity. We need, and you can see it, the most successful companies are the most creative companies. The most successful people and the ones who we admire are creative people that we call geniuses. So, but often people think that well, either creativity is elusive or only a few people have it, or it's just, it used to be people thought, well, you don't really need creativity. That's not serious. Now we recognize that we must be creative, and so generative, generate. It's the same word from genetics. It's this creation. Now the difference between typical creativity and generativity is, we say in generativity is where you're really going somewhere new. Nobody's been there before. Certainly you haven't been there before, and that's what pushes the edge of what's possible in our world. Because we say, right now, well, let's put it this way: 20 years ago, nobody could do what we do today in terms of cell phone, internet, etc. We've generated this, and now we have these capabilities. NLP has been generative. We want to create things that seem to people impossible now. And what is impossible now will be every day. Believe me, in 20 years, things that we think are impossible now. And this is the whole thing, by the way, about pseudoscience. All those new things come out of pseudosciences because they don't yet exist. Yeah. And this is why Albert Einstein said, imagination is more important than knowledge. So generativity has to do with imagination. Okay. It has to do with vision. It has to do with visioning what is possible in our world. And then one of my favorite definitions of NLP is that it's tools for dreamers. Right? It's the tools by which I can take this imagination and begin to actually bring it into this concrete expression.
And as you have been explaining it, and I see all the body movements here, which also just quickly links with that you're not only talking about the cognitive mind, you are talking about the somatic and quite a bit of a somatic, as I've seen here. Yeah. But does that somatic mind really is that much important in generation?
Absolutely. We would say, I think first of all, the somatic world and the field world are essentially the world of energy. Right? So, if you look at physics and you talk about an electric field, a magnetic field, it's energy. So, and the somatic world is a world of energy. With no energy, nothing happens. Nothing is created. Nothing new will happen. Right? So, so that in our somatic world, you're wanting to keep these kind of, you could say, rhythms. All energy moves in waves. And even your brain, you talk about brain waves. Where do those brain waves come from? Right? Well, the way, we say that these are all filters. I have cognitive filters, I have somatic filters, I have filters in the field. And those filters can either be rigid or they can be generative. And if I'm trying to think creatively in my body like this, I'm probably not going to get very far. So you could say, well, is it important how you hold your body? Absolutely. The whole Walt Disney strategy, dreamer, realist, critic, you see this, and you see it again. You look at these videos of people like Walt Disney in this dreamer stage. They're not like this. There's movement, there's exchange. That's the idea of generative collaboration. As you become realist, you do begin to, you'll see more like focus. It's more directed. So NLP has always said that, your state is probably the first and single most important factor in your performance. And I'd say ultimately NLP always, whatever a generation of it, and whatever, these minds that you're looking at, you're always looking at how can I improve in performance of some way. In generativity, it's how can I improve more creative performance. And what you're going to realize is that all performance is going to be extremely grounded and dependent on the somatic world. You perform through this. This is where you bring something into it.
We experienced it also here the last few weeks. I mean, that's true.
Yeah.
If you would use your imaginary creative vision and you would use it to look into a future for NLP, well, what would the field look like in, say, 10 years?
Well, first of all, my latest book is on generative collaboration, and the subtitle is Releasing the Creative Power of Collective Intelligence. And this is where I think at least I know my own work, but also I see it in a lot of other places, even as you were talking about here in NLP, that one of the challenges of the early NLP was that you had Bandler and Grinder modeling these therapists. So I like to say you had these two rebels, these revolutionaries, modeling these three loners, right? They worked by themselves, they developed all their own ideas. And so what NLP kind of lacked from the beginning, even though Bandler and Grinder clearly generatively collaborated, and we were a collaborative community, that wasn't the focus of the modeling. The modeling was always looking out, and it was always looking at individual performance, individual submodalities, I-axis and Qs, things like that. So what I think is happening is we begin to realize more and more that even NLP itself did not come from the creative expression of a single person. It came first from Bandler Grinder. Bandler Grinder also working and modeling with Erickson, Bateson, Satir, with us as a group, Judy, me, Steve Gilligan, David Gordon, other people, that actually emerges from this collective. And I think our world needs more of this collective intelligence, that to be able to integrate diversity, to be able to take the ways of thinking and the knowledge of all the different parts of our world to solve our global problems. There is no single one genius is going to do it. It's going to come from this movement to more collective intelligence. And I think that's what we're working on modeling. So what I would say, if I look to the future, I see NLP more and more integrating, but also NLP processes being used more and more for these kind of for collective purposes. Generative collaboration. When I was talking about the wisdom of crowds, we've been exploring here at NLPU this idea of dynamic teaming, where again this simple notion, and this also relates to generativity. The basic formula of generativity is 1 + 1 doesn't make 2, 1 + 1 makes 3. Right? Hydrogen and oxygen make water. A man and a woman make a baby. You're always getting at this third thing, and it can even be more. And so I think that really modeling that principle, that's the generative principle. And how do we bring that into our interactions? How do we bring that into, so if I look at the NLP world, rather than having these schools that fight against each other, we are able to bring together these ways of enhancing and cross-fertilizing what we do. Then I think you have the possibility for an incredibly, major quantum leap.
Wow. Thank you.
You have already gone through what transformation is doing in Pakistan and remaining part of the world. So for the people of Pakistan, what will be your comments for Transformation Forum?
Wow. Well, first of all, keep going. What I find is that in my own studies of generativity and genius, we usually find there's three things that you find that's common to all creative geniuses, no matter what, whether they're a genius like Erickson in the healing area, or Mozart, or a scientific genius or something. And the first is that there is an ability to be somehow comfortable with uncertainty. Because when you're in transformation, you don't know what's going to happen. And that comes from a trust. And that trust is usually going to come from a service to something bigger than you. So whatever it is that connects you, whether you want to say God, or you want to say the universe, or you want to say, our world, I think that helps us to realize, okay, I can't rush to an answer. There is no black or white, ultimate answer. And in fact, the second part of that you find with creative geniuses is that they can hold what seems initially to be a contradiction. Right? This doesn't fit with that. Right? These two things don't go together. Whether it's these two values, these two beliefs, these two things, but being able to hold them, and this is the idea of the 1 + 1 making 3. That we say, if I hold those in a state of anxiety, contraction, reactivity, paralysis, etc., you're not going to get any generativity. If I can hold them from this place of being centered, open, right, aware, trusting, those are all the things that NLP helps us to do. Then something really magical can happen. But the third characteristic of all creative people, so this ability to be with uncertainty, like Erickson saying, I don't know what the answer is, but I'm curious to discover what's possible. So instead of certainty, I have curiosity, and I think that's going to be really necessary for the people in Pakistan. Transformation needs uncertainty, and you've got to believe that something good is going to come. We will make it. Number 2, we need to be able to hold what seems to be contradictions without violence. To be able to hold them from a place of wisdom, from a place of, this idea of a greater whole mind. The third, persistence. Don't give up. You keep going. You go, and even everything all of the creative people, the successful people that I've interviewed, say essentially this NLP idea: there is no failure, there is only feedback. You never, if you know how to learn, you never fail. No matter what happens, you learn something. If it goes well, you learn something. If it doesn't go well, you learn something, and you keep going. And so I would say, to the people of Pakistan, trust, stay curious, be able to connect to, keep working to connect to as big of this whole on as you can, and don't give up.
And how do you feel that you are a collaboration guy? You're promoting collaboration. You're promoting collaboration. And you see that in with this collaboration concept, psychologists, psychiatrists, hypnotherapists, educationists in Pakistan getting approved by Ministry of Education and Ministry of Health working under one roof. So how will you take this as
I take that as a very good sign, obviously. I think that's good. That's a huge step. And I would say, again, continue to collaborate and even widen that collaboration, because you can bring in others too. Even widen that collaboration. Certainly, and I've said in my own passion is connection between people, connection to myself. It's creativity, collaboration, and contribution. And so I say, do it.
And I would say, what about the founder of that transformation? Yeah.
I would say, this is be the change you want to see in the world, and find good. NLP is always about finding good role models. It's about leadership. It's about, again, be the change you want to see, but also look for those who embody the change that you want to see.
Great.
Thank you very much, Robert.
Yeah, thank you very much. I really want to hug you. Really. And I want to finish to the camera in this case that obviously also the Dutch Association of NLP can be proud that Dr. Imran was here, because Transformation is a totally charity organization in Pakistan. Besides that, you are the president of the NLP organization in Pakistan, and we were both proud to have been able to talk to you, Robert. Thank you.
And thank you for providing all the tools which we were as a student were able to bring into the world and were able to guide the people for processing the change.
Yeah, and we've been saying that success of any kind is always accompanied by two feelings. One is gratitude, and the other is generosity. And It's what Milton Erickson told me when I was so grateful for what he gave me. Is he said, well, if you really want to show your gratitude, pass it on. So we pass it on, and then we pass it on, and we pass it on. So let's continue.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.